Parents who decided to cut contact with your children. What's the story? Took a bit to decide if I wanted to share my story, but here goes. I'm the father in question. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters and 1 son. They're all adults. I got married at 20 and we had them one after another. 4 years, my wife and I blamed ourselves about how my youngest girl turned out. Being so young, right out of community college, I wasn't making a lot, so I did the best I could. But we wonder if it was nutrition or the crap hole we stayed in or something that made her be born with severe BPD. We didn't know what it was at first. She was really difficult. We tried our best to raise her well. By the time we figured out what was wrong with her, she had set in really bad behaviors. We still think she's the one that mutilated the neighbor's cat, but can't prove it. As of 2 years ago, she refused to take her medications, was sleeping around with whoever would shoot her up with drugs, stealing money, and generally being really difficult. We told her to leave and never come back. Tried to get her into a state mental place but it wasn't an option. So we just closed our doors and moved shortly after. Honestly don't know what happened to her since. I tell people I only have 2 kids. Wife is devastated, but I'm just relieved. Sorry, baby K. I'll try to keep this short, because diving into all of what has happened that lead to us cutting contact would be a novel. When I married my husband he already had 2 older children that lived with their mother. My husband and I ended up having 2 kids of our own. While my oldest was an infant my stepchildren moved in with us and that's when everything started. They caused so many problems for us. I'm talking heavy drugs, sneaking out and getting arrested, you name it. The older of the 2 called CPS twice and made up lies about me being abusive. As a new mom the investigations were terrifying, but in the end they found their claims to be false. The final straw of them living with us was when we got wind of them pissing off the wrong crowd and the possibility of our home getting shot up. Their dad sent them to live with their mother. I'm just going to jump to when the actual cutoff happened, but keep in mind we had an endless amount of horrible incidents with them over the years, and we tried to help them countless times. They were both in their 20s at this point. Essentially, we discovered they were stealing from my side of the family. They robbed my sister of her fine jewelry and took what we totaled to be around $25,000 from 3 family members. Beyond that, they had a drug operation going on in a family member's summer cottage. The family member didn't know they were even there as he lived elsewhere most of the time. When confronted by their dad, they blew up. They said some of the most hateful things I've ever heard and spit in his face. That was it for us. They took advantage of people that love them very much and had no remorse for it. My stepson is a mess. My husband and his ex-wife divorced when SS was 18 months old, and mom had done whatever she could to cut dad completely out of his life until SS was 8 when she showed up at our door with SS in tow and his bags. She said she couldn't handle him anymore. All he would do was fight with his siblings. So if we didn't take him then she was going to take him to the children's home. Of course my husband was excited to finally spend time with his son, and he would get to bond with his little half-brother who was 4 at the time and stepsister who was 10. It became apparent very quickly that he had been fed lie after lie about his dad. He would gleefully share very detailed stories about the abuse that he remembered that he and his mom suffered at the hands of my husband. SS was in therapy, but really started escalating dangerous behaviors. My daughter would wake up in the middle of the night with him standing over her saying next time you'll never wake up. So we put a lock on her door which he broke through with ease. We put a deadbolt on her door. He broke the door frame trying to get to her. His little brother would walk by and he would kick him as hard as he could. He bit him until he would draw blood. The last straw for me was when he barricaded himself in his room with his little brother. I could hear my son screaming when I finally got in. My SS was molesting him. That for me was the last straw. He needed more help than what his therapist or we could do for him. The next day child services was contacted and he was removed from our home. A few weeks later CPS gave us pages and pages of psychological evaluations that his mom had on him. Pages of her blaming dad for each of his issues, lies that he had beaten molested him, although there were statements from doctors that had clearly outlined that mom and her family had some seriously undiagnosed mental issues. There was so much information that would have been helpful before he came to live with us. I would never tell my husband that he cannot see his son, but his son is never allowed around my children. I made that promise to them both, and I hate that my husband is in the middle, but for our safety I've cut off any contact with my stepson. I gave my son up for adoption at birth. I was broke, jobless, homeless, sort of. I had a room at the worst hotel in town, was about to kick his dad out, and even if I could find a job I had no one that would watch my then 18-month-old and a newborn while I worked. I know a lot of y'all will rag on me for even being pregnant. We had a great apartment, a happy relationship, and great jobs when we decided to try for another baby. Things went south really fast, and I couldn't think of anything else I could do for my kids than to give the baby to parents that could take care of him the way he deserved straight from the start and fight like hell to claw my way out of the hole I was in and give my other kid a better life too. So I did it. I gave him up to wonderful, amazing people. 6 weeks later I was cleared to work and miraculously got a job. Saved for a year and moved myself, my toddler, and my kid's dad out of that godforsaken town. Years and years later I'm doing very well. I stuck to my promise that it would be worth it. Anywho, I haven't talked to him. I got letters from his mom for a while, always with pictures, but not anymore. I never responded to them or wrote him. They had been burned in the past by birth moms shopping around and trying to sell their babies, and I've heard horror stories about adoptees contacting their birth parents and discovering they were utter crap and they were better off without knowing what happened to their birth parents. I was worried that me contacting them would complicate his life in ways he didn't need. They are wonderful people. I would rather live in pain, heartbreak, and uncertainty than intrude in their happiness. I want to know him more than anything in the world, but if he doesn't, I'll stay right here, away, quietly making good on my promise to him that it would be right and worth it, and that I would never again be in that spot. He will be 15 now. Matthew, if you are reading this, I love you. Forever and always, my baby you'll be. I don't love her, she doesn't love me, and we have nothing in common. All names are changed. When I was 22 I met a beautiful woman who was in half my college classes, but was a mature student. When Ella was 14 she'd given birth to a daughter Anna. By the time Ella and I moved in together Anna was already 15. It was like having a roommate. Anna was a great kid and all that jazz, but she wasn't interested in spending all that much time with some random man. Then 3 years later she moved out, and I became the random ex-roommate who covers her tuition. People seem to think it's a tragedy, but we don't dislike each other. We are just not interested in contacting each other. We both love Ella and sometimes we happen to be spending time with her at the same time, like when Anna comes home for Christmas. When I married Ella I promised to take care of Anna. I don't regret that, but my care falls mostly on the financial side. Although I went to every game she had and every teacher conference, we just failed to bond. She's more like a distant cousin than a daughter. My 33-year-old daughter chose drugs and thug life over her husband and 2 boys. Hasn't seen her boys in 4 years. They're only 7 and 5. The oldest remembers her, the youngest does not. I've been dealing with her darkness since she was in 4th grade. Took her to countless therapists in her youth. She convinced them all she was fine. I tried to help her through probation and rehab again last year in the hopes of reuniting her with her boys. She was snorting, now she's shooting. Nothing legal to keep her from these boys. She chose drugs. I'm done. Never realized what an epidemic this has become until I started talking to people who are dealing with the same thing with loved ones. It's definitely effed up. I had a daughter when I was fairly young. I married her mother and spent a few hellish years with her until divorce became necessary. We agreed to split custody, so long as she received full physical custody. It made sense under 3 circumstances. Within a few years, it became obvious my emotionally volatile ex-wife was just poisoning our daughter with absurd lies, and to some extent, no doubt, her family as well. My kid became distant and then anxious around me. Her mom began to move an awful lot and it, eventually, became undeniable that she was intentionally hiding from me. I tracked her down on Christmas 2013 at a house her father directed me towards. She was livid that I showed up to say Merry Christmas and drop off gifts for my daughter and her younger sister. My daughter looked at me like a complete stranger, even frightened. They were never home when I tried to visit after this, and soon moved again. Realized no contact was available to me. Her mom called me from her mother's number months after and asked for a large sum of cash to pay for school stuff. It was April, I think. I asked her where my daughter was before I agreed to anything, and she got angry and hung up. I stopped trying, I guess. My daughter refused to leave her second husband, who would get drunk and try to kill her. Once when one of my granddaughters, who happened to be 6 months pregnant, tried to intervene, he knocked her to the floor. He picked up my daughter by her neck and slammed her head so hard against the wall it left a hole. Last time he pulled out a gun and pointed towards my other granddaughter, who was trying to get my daughter away from him. He had already shot a hole in the tile in the master bathroom. He was also bullying my 15-year-old grandson on a daily basis. We now have custody of the kiddos, but every time the phone rings our anxiety hits the roof, as we fear that will be the call to say my daughter is dead. Background: we took her and her first husband in when he wouldn't work on a regular basis because they had no food, no money, and being evicted. Once the first hubby stole my mother's wedding rings. When I asked him where they were, he said he'd taken them to a jeweler to be sized for my daughter. I went to the jeweler. Nope, no rings, no record of the rings. I confronted the sister-in-law and he finally admitted he pawned them. Another time he stole my ATM card out of my purse and helped himself to $300. Had to get the video from the bank to prove to him that he was busted. This is while they lived with us. He pretended he got paid for a job. Once he said he had gotten a job. He didn't. He left every day and went who knows where till 6 p.m. All of that through their 7 evictions, paid for movers' storage, and brought them back to our house to live. Oh, and we bailed him out of jail 4 times. I have bailed my daughter out of jail 3 times, and she was in the mental hospital 3 times for suicide attempts. My daughter finally left him, yay, only to hook up with another abuser. I still love her, but have done all I can. Let's start with when she was 12. She was already a handful, but that was when she stole the babysitter's car and wrecked it into 3 other cars and a building. We ended up going bankrupt and moving to Utah. Please note that it is easier to cage a feral child in Utah than it is in California. We moved back to California when she was 15. She and her friends stole heirlooms from us and medications. She made up lies about what a big dope dealer I was and how I abused her. Yeah, I might plead guilty to that if you will take her off my hands. Neither cops nor counselors/enablers like to hear that one, especially when other professionals laugh at them and say, "Oh, he said that to you also?" Here, call SGT Jones. He has the folder. Basically, she has mental illness and likes to not take her meds, run wild, and party. Gloss over. Basically, she has made our lives a living heck. I say heck because I know of stories even worse. I had cancer about 4 years ago, and survivors last 3 to 8 years, on average. She was going through a non-medicated stage, and had left her boyfriend and special needs toddler because I then made the comment, "How do you think he feels about his mother leaving?" And she went totally batcrap ballistic on me. I won't post most of what she said, but "You're a sick old bastard, and I hope you die a lonely painful death," was a defining moment for me. Life, considering, is too short to put up with such shit. It's been 25 years since she was 12, and was old and tired and had put up with enough. I will not acknowledge her nor speak to her. Even though my wife is an enabler, she knows better than to go there. As far as I'm concerned, my daughter disappeared at about 10 and was replaced by a monster. I've tried and given up. It weakens me too much to fight her mental demons and mine too. I hope she finds the help she needs, but don't bother calling me and telling me if she does. I'll most likely be dead. My uncle had this experience. He has 4 kids, 3 of which are married, 2 of which have kids and are very happy. The first kid, however, who shared my uncle and grandfather's namesake, was not a good kid. From a very young age he was a kleptomaniac. My mom would babysit him when she was younger, around 14 or 15 years old. She's much younger than my uncle, by over a decade. He would steal her wallet when she wasn't looking. He'd try to steal things from stores. The list goes on. They thought it was the kind of mischievous behavior that a kid could be led to do and could be taught not to do. Now I don't know him very well, so I don't know all of the details, but essentially, he didn't stop. He'd steal cars, motorcycles, credit cards, and a whole host of things. When my uncle would help, it only ended up putting him in my cousin's radar for theft. Long story short, we don't see him at any family gatherings. Like and subscribe for more Reddit videos.